It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel, and today's kind of a tricky day. It's the first day of legal tampering. As I record this, I am about 2 hours into legal tampering. The Texans have not made any signings or agreed to any signings of note. I think the two most notable things to have happened are Tyler Linderbaum, the center and the apple of everybody's eye from the Ravens, signs with the Raiders for a 3-year, $81 million deal. That is a boatload of money for a center. And I like Tyler Linderbaum a lot, but for a Texans team that needs to address multiple positions on their offensive line, including at this point, right tackle, I like Trent Brown a lot. And for those of you who missed it, Trent Brown signed a 1-year deal last week. But he has not been durable in his career, and I'm not super comfortable with Blake Fisher as a swing tackle. So I'm looking at it as a left guard, center, and right tackle conundrum right now, or swing tackle conundrum. So, which we have to get to as well. Ed Ingram re-signed with the Texans this morning. We'll get into that and more. But Cade Mays and Tyler Linderbaum, the top two centers, pretty much by consensus in this free agency period, have both agreed to terms with teams. And this is disappointing to me. There are still guys out there, but a lot of the center market was hemmed up even before the legal tampering period began, with a couple different trades and signings of guys that were already out there on the street. This is something that is going to have to be addressed at some point. The optimism around whether or not Nick Caserio will, A, be aggressive in signing offensive linemen, and B, if he is aggressive, will he be effective in doing it? It's pretty damn low in the fan base right now. I'm either delusional or cautiously optimistic that they are going to take care of it. If you recall, a couple years ago, the first day of free agency, notoriously known as when all the stupid money flies around, that's when a lot of times people stretch way more aggressively than they should, and they overspend to sign good players to awesome deals. And I'm cool with my team generally missing out on that portion of free agency year by year. It tends to be the best strategy. But there's a balance there where at some point you got to acknowledge, man, we're in desperate straits, and we cannot go into this next season with the same strategy or attitude that they had going into this season, which is you sign 4 tepid free agents, nobody that anybody gets really excited about. And hey, a couple of them worked out. Ed Ingram ended up playing the best year of his career. Trent Brown, who I didn't expect to even play last year because he was a 370-pound behemoth coming off of a patellar tendon injury. I'm glad that he was able to play as well as he did for the Texans. But it didn't really help you that Laken Tomlinson was a tryout at left guard for the first half of the season. And I don't know if he's even going to play any more football after this year. Who was he trying out with? Juice Scruggs. Juice Scruggs cast off like used tissue paper, like no big deal in that trade for David Montgomery. And that's how you spent the first half of last year, trying to tiptoe your way through figuring out how to have a run game, how to hem up pass protection, because you took half measures in signing offensive lineman. Cam Robinson didn't even make it to halfway through the season. And this is what happens when you try to take the super conservative route, build slowly and organically as much as possible. When you have guys who are starters, who are journeymen / backup caliber starters, and they go down or they don't work out or they play exactly like you should have expected them to, A, you get bad performances out of the offensive line. And then B, when those guys get injured, then you've got guys who couldn't even beat out the journeyman / backup type to be the starter. Am I overly frustrated for being a few hours into legal tampering? Yes, I am. And a couple years ago, the Texans had this same strategy. Everybody was all up in arms. They ended up signing Danielle Hunter, ended up being pretty aggressive in free agency. They just took their time doing it. There's still plenty of good guards available, not as many centers available in free agency. And then, of course, there's the draft. So I want to go over some of the signings and re-signings and restructures that they did do, and then we'll move on from there. Maybe by the end of this podcast, we'll have an update of some sort. And of course, the draft is intermingled amongst all of these discussions about how the roster is going to look. Over on FanDuel right now, you can bet on who the number 1 overall pick will be. Fernando Mendoza, very heavily the favorite at minus 20,000. Spencer Fano, the offensive tackle, is interesting. He's at plus 12,500. And he's interesting to me as a Texans fan because his teammate, Caleb Lomu, is I've seen Ran Carthon, the former GM of the Titans, guy that's got some common DNA via the San Francisco 49ers with DeMeco Ryans. He actually thinks that Caleb Lomu, who's been mocked to the Texans late in the first round, is the third best offensive tackle in the draft. So from a guy that used to draft offensive tackles, and take that for what it's worth, I think there are going to be a lot of offensive tackles available in the draft. Fernando Mendoza at minus 20,000 seems like a runaway favorite, and the Raiders seem to be in super spend mode right now to begin with, and they've got all this extra draft capital. I'd be surprised if anything moves off of that, but you can check that out on FanDuel. The big notable signing from today was Ed Ingram. Ed Ingram re-signed for a 3-year deal, $37.5 million with $12.5 million annually, $23.5 million in guarantees. The deal prevents the 27-year-old veteran who was acquired in a 2025 trade from hitting free agency. This was polarizing, more polarizing than I thought it would be when I would discuss this before free agency or legal tampering started, just because I was very much all about signing Ed Ingram as long as they got him at the right price. There were some projections that if he hit free agency, he would have gotten $15 or $16 million a year. I thought that was too rich. I'm glad that the Texans were able to lock him down for less than that. This seems about appropriate, but I think the people that are down on Ed Ingram very understandably and justifiably worry about his pass protection. The people that are high on Ed Ingram, like myself, are very high on him because of one big thing, and that he's nasty. Like, this Texans offensive line has lacked nastiness. We've gone through a long stretch where even their two best players weren't necessarily nasty, swarmy type of football players. Laramie Tunsil's awesome. Very, very good in pass protection. Always seemed like a reluctant run blocker, reluctant blocker on screens, all of these things that were the kind of blue-collar part of the game. He wasn't into it. So he's a great football player, but he's not necessarily in the mold of a DeMeco Ryans. Ed Ingram is very much in the mold of a DeMeco Ryans type of football player. Ed Ingram, if he played defensive tackle for the Texans, he might not be athletic enough, but he would swarm his ass off. He would get after it because he's nasty in the run game. When it comes to pass protection versus some of the better defensive linemen in the league, like Chris Jones, for instance, one of the better defensive linemen in the league, and he was going off versus the Texans, he struggles. And the thing that's interesting about that is, he's a younger player who, given last year as evidence, he's still got room for improvement. He improved a lot more than I thought he would have, played a lot better than I thought he would have. So there's time for him to clean up some of the issues he has in pass protection. And a lot of those issues stem from him being a nasty, aggressive type. He likes to just come after guys and, jump set them, get his hands on them, punch them, do all these things early in the down. That's a great strategy, except you got to be judicious in when you use it, because when you do it against guys like Chris Jones, that's when they all of a sudden just bat your hands out of the way, snatch you, and get back to the quarterback. So Cole Popovich working with Ed Ingram needs to be something that continues to advance. But the sum total of it is I think he's a quality starter in the NFL. If you have an awesome offensive line, he's not going to be your best or your second best offensive lineman, but he can be part of a solid blocking unit. So between the swarm, his upside, and just the fact that Cole Popovich seems to like him, I think he is worth retaining, especially because you still have that center and left guard position to worry about. I'm not all that excited about using draft picks to address those things, because even if you're the world's best GM at drafting offensive linemen, you're going to whiff on a few of them. And to go into a season with the guys they have in there currently and then hoping that your draft picks work out, it's a dicey proposition. So the Texans offensive line, as we know right now, not championship caliber offensive line. Defense, 100% championship caliber. Sheldon Rankins was re-signed. He was a part of that championship caliber defense. Right now on FanDuel, the Houston Texans are the 6th favorite to win the AFC at plus 1,000. Ahead of them are the Ravens, the Bills, the Chargers, the Chiefs, and the Patriots. A lot of familiar characters on that list. Every one of them the Texans played last year. They beat the Ravens without Lamar Jackson. They beat the Bills, who they face again at home. Beat the Chargers, barely. Beat the Chiefs on the road. Travis Kelce apparently coming back. And the Patriots, you guys all remember that. Offensive line, a better offensive line would have helped there. Sheldon Rankins re-signs with the Texans. That's the other big thing that happened this morning before we hit the legal tampering period. I'm really happy about this one. Reports are that he got 2 years with $12 million guaranteed. I haven't seen the total dollar amount. I'm guessing that a big chunk of that contract is guaranteed. So let's call it $6 or $7 million per year. That's an appropriate price to pay for a defensive tackle that's been very valuable for the Texans. I was looking at the Athletics rankings of interior defensive linemen, and they had Sheldon Rankins as the 9th free agent amongst interior defensive linemen. And it was interesting because he had the second most pressures amongst all those guys. John Franklin Myers had the most, and he was their number 1 ranked interior defensive lineman. And that matches the eyeball test. Sheldon Rankins had 3 sacks last year, but provides a lot of push up the middle, provides a lot of penetration, both in the run game and as a pass rusher. He might just not rack up a boatload of sacks, but I really like him in conjunction with Tommy Togiai, because Togiai is a guy that can totally suck up double teams. He's really, really stout versus the run. Sheldon Rankins, not as stout versus the run, not stout versus double teams necessarily. But when you pair up a couple of defensive tackles where one's more of the penetrator and one is a guy that is a little bit more conservative or can soak up blocks and then kind of play in behind the chaos that's created by a penetrating defensive lineman, that's a good combo to have. Haven't had any word about Tim Settle yet. I think the Texans might allow him to test free agency and probably would love to have him back, but they got to find the right price. The nice thing about this Sheldon Rankins re-signing is that you go into the draft with all of your starters except for that safety position opposite of Kalen Bullock. I know I should call it strong safety, but it's kind of passe these days. There's free safeties. Guys got to be able to play in the box and deep. Kalen Bullock's obviously a deep safety, so let's call it strong safety next to him. It was a rotating cast of characters. If Jalen Reed can come along, and I think they like Jalen Reed, then he's probably penciled in as your starter. But that's really the one spot on the defense right now where you don't have a named starter from last year to take that number 1 overall, number 2 scoring defense back to the same heights they were before. You can go into the draft and on the defensive side of the ball, not necessarily feel a desperation to find some guy in the first round. All these mock drafts that had the Texans taking defensive tackles early, I think that'll kind of fall by the wayside now, especially after they traded away Titus Howard. Even with the re-signing of Trent Brown, I think most people, both inside and outside of Houston, are looking at it as, all right, if you don't sign one in free agency, you got to bolster that offensive tackle position. The offensive side of the ball right this moment, the glaring area of need is obviously on the offensive line. Tight end and having a tight end to complement Dalton Schultz, maybe. I don't know how aggressive you want to be. I saw Isaiah Likely already signed earlier this morning. Travis Kelce is going back to his old team. There's some doubt as to whether he would retire or seek employment elsewhere. Looks like he's going to Kansas City. Let me know in the comments if you guys would have been into Travis Kelce coming to Houston. I was on with Brandon Scott this morning. Brandon was filling in with Sean Pendergast, and he brought up a great comparison that Travis Kelce coming to the Texans right now might feel a little too much like Ed Reed coming to the Texans back in the day, where, oh, wow, you've got this Hall of Fame caliber player. Yeah, he's at the end of his career. Yeah, boy, he sure didn't look that great versus the Texans as he was bobbling up the final game-sealing interception. But he's got that championship DNA. I just don't know. I don't know how well Travis Kelce would have adjusted to being in a new environment. As Brandon pointed out brilliantly, is D'Amico Ryan's going to be cool with Travis Kelce coming up and jawing in his face and chest bumping him the way Travis Kelce would do with Andy Reid. I highly doubt it. I think D'Amico might get arrested after an exchange like that. I think that's the one thing that could make D'Amico snap, I think. So it's probably for the best. Not that it was anything I was seriously considering. Not until I started seeing these reports about how Travis Kelce was potentially going to be a free agent, did I even think about that. And as we get into some of the restructures, all right. So Linderbaum, the center from the Ravens who went to the Raiders, his deal is $27 million a year. That is pricey. That's about $10 million more than the current highest paid center. Cade Mays, the center from Carolina, went to the Lions for 3 years, $25 million. That is affordable. If Linderbaum is priced like a designer handbag from Dior, and it's not worth it, you're paying for the brand name. Cade Mays is kind of like a suitable computer bag from Target. Doesn't have you don't know the name of the designer, but it looks like the stitching is good. I would have taken that in a heartbeat. And honestly, I'll be surprised if the Texans just weren't in on Cade Mays. If I'm Cade Mays, boy, do you choose to go to the Lions or the Texans, given what they have on offense already with Detroit? Yeah, they lost Montgomery, but they let Montgomery go because Jahmyr Gibbs is incredible. That makes sense, but it'll still hurt. It'll hurt if you find out that the Texans made an equal offer and he chose the Lions. So the center position, as we discussed, is a little bit dicey. With the restructures, the most notable one, Danielle Hunter. I can't remember for the life of me if I discussed it on this podcast or not and when it happened last week. I don't think we did. But the Danielle Hunter signing, I know was met with a lot of either skepticism or alarm by Texans fans, partly because it felt like, okay, well, you're spending this money on Danielle Hunter, then it must mean you're not going to spend heavily on the offensive line. I don't think that those two things are necessarily related. The deal for Danielle Hunter actually ended up clearing about $15 or $16 million in cap space for this year. That shouldn't be prohibitive. The Texans are still in pretty good cap shape. And you got to remember, it's not just this year's number and how much cap space they have. They have a lot of flexibility in next year and the 2028 cap, as well as still more veterans that they can restructure. I was excited about this. I think Danielle's been exactly what I would want, both as a player, if I were in Danielle's shoes, but if I'm a team too. You get a guy who's playing at a high caliber, but he's in his 30s, and you don't want to be stuck with this 4 or 5 year deal where if a guy starts getting injured all the time, that you have to cut ties with him and it's a lot of dead money. So you can control your costs. So this still doesn't bite into or eat into the time where Will Anderson Jr.'s cap number is going to start to go way up. Remember, if Will Anderson Jr. redoes his deal this year, that new money doesn't kick in hardcore for a couple of years. So you don't have to worry necessarily about the guys that you might be able to sign in the next couple of years on short-term deals. I like it. I like that they've been going this way. He's been one of the top 5 edge rushers in the league in the last 2 years since he signed with the Texans. I think that one made a lot of sense. Dalton Schultz extended his deal by 1 year, ended up making him the 10th highest paid tight end in the league. And I know a lot of people raised their eyebrows about that. I'm cool with that because by the time free agency is over, he'll probably be about the 15th highest paid tight end in the league. And that's a guy, okay, if you're paying him like the average starter in the NFL, if you're 15th or 16th out of 32 starters in the NFL, that's a pretty good deal. And for the production you got from him, I'm good with that. Jalen Petrie, Derek Stingley, they kind of restructured their deals. No big deal there, just standard things where you guarantee some money, push it off into the future. You like those guys. Sometimes you don't even have to ask the player when you do that. It's automatically in their contract. A lot of times people look at it like, oh, wow, what a cool guy. He worked with the team to restructure his deal. It might be true that those guys are both cool guys, but usually when the player restructures his deal, it means you get more guaranteed money. The dollar amount on the contract doesn't change. You just have more of it guaranteed. So it works out pretty well for the player. I had to do this a couple times as a player, and it was always nice because fans would thank me for it. And I would not be transparent. I would say, yes, I'm a very selfless individual. I took that salary, converted to signing bonus. And sure, I gave all of it, every bit of it to charity. So those are the most notable deals that were done before and into the legal tampering period. And as I await some kind of news, please give me something notable, somebody I can latch on to. I have to think about the draft still, and something we do on Payne and Pendergast. I apologize, Sean Pendergast. The mock draft injection, where we kind of go through the mock drafts and get a bead on what the Texans might be taking. As I mentioned earlier, As soon as the Texans traded away Titus Howard, almost every mock draft started featuring an offensive tackle for the Texans. I think it very well might work out that way. Today, I want to look at Jeff Schwarz, former offensive lineman, the brother of Mitchell Schwarz. Mitchell Schwarz was the better offensive lineman in the league, but Jeff Schwarz, I think, is the smarter of those two siblings, and he does a lot in media right now. On Fox Sports, he did his mock draft. He had the Texans taking Caleb Lomu, the offensive tackle out of Utah, saying this: out of the pair of Utah offensive tackles drafted in the first round, he's talking about Spencer Fano, who's one of the more high-ranked offensive tackles. I think Lomu might end up being the better one once he gains some strength. He's an outstanding mover and thrives as a pass blocker. And this is a common theme right now with a lot of the mock drafts and some of the, as it is every year with a lot of the draft prospects, a lot of these offensive tackles they're big, they're athletic, they move well, but they ain't got their man strength yet. They don't have their even close to their dad's strength. Even if they're literally dads, they don't necessarily have dad's strength. And if he came from Utah, there's a chance he's a Mormon and he's actually, or he's LDS and he is an actual dad. I don't know. And frankly, I will not ask because that is an HR violation. Everybody knows that. But Caleb Lomu, 6'6", 305, and as Jeff Schwarz mentions there, he needs to put on some strength. That's exactly what he looks like when he's running around. Blake Miller, the offensive tackle from Clemson, is a guy that profiles kind of similarly, and he's been mocked to the Texans a whole bunch. It really comes down to taste and style right now at this point. If I were to think, say, the difference between Caleb Lomu and a guy like Kaden Proctor out of Alabama, Kaden Proctor is just an absolute mountain of a man. He's 6'7". He's 360 pounds. He's Trent Brown sized, but he's put together a little bit more stoutly looking than Trent Brown. We know Trent Brown at this point looks like an overgrown adolescent, and yet it somehow is really, really effective. But Kaden Proctor is just a brute of a dude, and he feels more like what Cole Popovich might be into. You got to be careful with all of this because, man, sometimes guys who are big and strong and physical, but they lack the athleticism, it's not like all of a sudden they get quicker feet. It's more realistic to expect somebody like Caleb Lomu or Blake Miller, who's not all that strong yet, that they'll grow into their frame and they'll get their man strength with a couple of years of maturity. Not as often that somebody who's not fast enough all of a sudden gets faster. Fast is a dicey word to use with offensive linemen, but you know what I mean. Fast, the way they move their feet, athletic, smooth movers, all of that. But I like Kaden Proctor. The thing about the offensive tackle class is that it's almost impossible for me to envision a situation where the Texans don't have a bunch of viable options when they get to 28. I think there's going to be multiple offensive tackles that are slotted to be late first round guys by the time they get to number 28. And we know what that means, right? Yep. Buckle up if you're at the draft party. The Texans will probably trade back out of the first round into the second round and kind of wait for one of those offensive linemen to get to them unless they feel strongly about one of these guys. And if they're not aggressive in free agency, I'm going to be I will. My patience will have been tested. I'm trying, man. I'm trying to preach I'm trying to preach patience. I'm trying to preach fiscal responsibility. I'm trying to do all those things, but it's testing me. And it's because this would be the second year where the Texans heading into the draft didn't look like they'd addressed the offensive line all that aggressively. And I think they did a good job with Ariante Irissery last year. I think Ariante Irissery is going to be good. That's great. They didn't do a great job with Kenyon Green. They didn't do a great job with Juice Scruggs. They certainly didn't do a great job with Blake Fisher as of yet. So guys that Nick has drafted in the top 3 rounds as offensive linemen, it's only worked out so far, and it's still premature to give a final grade on it. Is Ariante Irissery. So I get nervous going into the draft if you're playing this game of, well, we'll trade back because we like all these offensive tackles equally or what have you. If they trade up, please, just can you do that? Unless by the time maybe even you're watching or listening to this, they've taken care of it and the offensive line is the thing of envy. It's the offseason that everybody would have wanted, like the Chicago Bears last year. Boy, it's testing me, man. I can feel myself. I'm drifting. I'm drifting off into insanity. Bring me back in, Nick. Be my Zoloft, okay? Be my straitjacket. Keep me from feeling this way because I'm feeling kind of frantic. Thank you to FanDuel for sponsoring my frantic butt in the Believe in Texans podcast. You can subscribe to us on Apple, leave a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and we will catch up after there's some damned activity